Okay, I think we've hit 1 minute past. We've got a bunch of folks joining into the webinar. So great. Welcome to today's webinar from Virtuoso, the future of testing tools. Sounds exciting, and believe me, it will be. So first thing, going to introduce two handsome folks. Well, one of them probably is, and I'll give you a hint, it's not me. So we've got firstly myself, James Bent, VP of Solutions Engineering here at Virtuoso. Apparently, I'm the go-to sales engineer, which just means people like to ask me to do work, and I say, okay. Then with me, we've got the brilliant Bruno. I say Lopes. He says, if you're English, you can just say Lopez. Bruno, do you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Yeah, I'm VP of product for Virtuoso, and it's amazing being able to bundle up with a bunch of really good product engineering guys to build Virtuoso.
Awesome. Thanks, Bruno. So look, let's get straight into it. It's going to be a mix of Bruno is going to give us a few insights into the future of testing with Virtuoso. And then I'll be doing a bit of a presentation about how the platform actually works and how we think we're going to build from what we have into the future. So the agenda for today will just be to cover off what are the main challenges of testing today. Then Bruno will be introducing a vision for the future of testing tools and how Virtuoso is seizing this opportunity for your benefit. Then we'll get into a bit of demo time before a bit of Q&A. Should be all done by about 1:30. So Bruno, I think over to you.
Okay, thanks, James. And thanks everyone for joining. So let me quickly just highlight some of the factors that are, in our view, creating pressure on testing teams. And first of all, I guess this digital age that we all live in has made people less tolerant for bugs. We are so used to great digital experience that we just expect both quality and release space in all apps and systems that we use, including business systems. Also, applications are getting more complex, more distributed, testing across multiple systems with multiple services, often hundreds of services, often owned by multiple teams with different data sets, different environments. It's just a complex challenge from an architecture standpoint that then reflects on how hard it is to test those systems and applications. And there's more. There's standards and frameworks that keep evolving, agile, CI/CD, shorter, more compressed release cycles, low-code development tools, essentially multiple factors that they just tend to push harder on testing teams and testing people. And on top of all this, of course, resources are often limited, skills are limited, demand is way higher than supply for good quality people. And it's just a fact of life. Regardless of how large our company is, bandwidth is always limited. So this kind of sets the scene. Let's dig a deeper on the challenge or the more technical challenges of testing. And so what are those challenges? One thing we keep seeing, particularly across our customer base, is this idea of shorter release cycles. This is a fundamental reason why QA teams keep working to shift testing left, to test more in sprints, to create test automations, while features are still being coded, for example. But then the challenge is that creating automated tests using code is time-consuming. It can become quite complicated. It can become complicated quite quickly. First is just another place to introduce bugs. That's one thing. Worse than that, lots of test automation code means more code to maintain. So you have your application code and you have loads of test code to maintain. And maintaining coded tests really adds up over time and can become a huge problem and hinder test automation initiatives quite quickly. And then we have data. Real life testing needs to be dynamic, needs to leverage existing data, needs to generate new data every time it runs. Data is a key part of good testing with proper coverage. But accessing existing data or preparing new data is often a huge and often underappreciated task for QA teams. And I guess the other aspect is that because what we test is complex, testing tools need to be able to cope with that complexity. We know that code-based frameworks are usually able to do that, but that usually or always, I should say, comes with a significant investment of time and money into those frameworks. So low code or codeless testing tools should help. They should, and they do, but often they do that at the expense of capabilities. They trade power for ease of use and then struggle with advanced scenarios where we have multiple teams, multiple testers, complex test scenarios. And so this kind of sets the tone to move on to what we believe is the future of testing tools and where they are heading. And let me start by getting this out of the way first. Can we expect truly autonomous testing tools anytime soon, in the sense that tools that simply figure out what to test and just deliver the results? If that's what we truly mean by autonomous testing, then I believe that we are still several years away, because there are still several significant problems to crack before we get there. I do believe, though, that we are collectively pushing new techniques that get us closer to that kind of holy grail of test automation. But realistically, it will take some time. So what's a more pragmatic vision for the next few years? I believe it will be essentially around three key dimensions or high-level dimensions. And the first one is tools really need to focus on the user, the tester. They should prioritize the user experience. It's not because they're automation tools that the user doesn't matter. We believe that it matters, and it's the most important thing, really, is to focus there. There are plenty of tools that try to do very clever things, but they forget to bring that to the user in an elegant and usable way. You build a brilliant feature, you forget about the user experience, you're done. So I do still believe that putting that experience above everything else is key for the most successful testing tools in the future. Now, I mentioned before that the applications and systems we test are complex, so tools need to be powerful, rich, nuanced. They need to cover those simple but also complex use cases. We tend to talk about testing complex systems that should be easy but should never be simplistic, because it's not something that we can approach from a simplistic perspective. So tools need to push much harder in supporting complex scenarios, dynamic data, environments with unpredictable states, page structures that change, backend API calls that might be needed, etc., etc., etc. They need to keep pushing to reduce maintenance, to help people go beyond the failing test and help people actually finding the bug. But maybe above all, tools need to get even more intelligent. And what I mean by this, let me be clear, we don't see smarter platforms replacing even smarter people. Testers are not going anywhere, and at least in the foreseeable future, we will always be in the driving seat. What we see, though, is closer collaboration, is the platform and the user working in tandem to deliver tests faster and better. So they both contribute with content like tests, test steps, test scripts, but one, the user, steers the other, the tool, to achieve certain outcomes faster. And so essentially the platform anticipates what the user might want, the user validates, and the platform gets better each time. And so with that, which we believe is kind of three key areas that tools need to get right so that they can succeed and truly deliver value, how are we seizing that opportunity in Virtuoso? And this is my last slide. I believe this is where it gets interesting, really. So let me start with a few examples on how we are pushing on the user experience, the tester experience. And the first one, really, is that we want people to focus on the functional and business aspect of their testing. So we believe that the best way to create tests is to describe your intent, your intention in the most natural way possible. To do that, we offer a powerful English syntax that captures that intention, what you're trying to do, clicking on something, writing something, looking for a certain element, always in English in a very expressive NLP approach. And we keep investing on this approach. By doing so, we make it easier to create tests, and they are much more stable. It's easier to create, but more than that, they're more stable, executions are smoother, tests are less flaky, and as I said before, maintenance effort reduces massively. And that's a key thing for successful test automation initiatives. We also solved test debugging in a quite a unique way by offering testers a real-time assistant that executes those natural language steps that they wrote in real time, providing real-time feedback so that you know if you got it right. We call this live authoring, and it's quite unique. While doing that, we've also armed our embedded browser with a set of development tools that facilitate debugging of tests or debugging of the application itself when you're trying to diagnose the bug. I think you're going to like what James will show you in a minute. Another feature we are working on that we believe will make a massive, massive difference in the user experience and the test authoring experience is this idea of intelligent autocomplete. As we explore your application and as you write your test steps, we'll recommend elements to interact with, dynamic data, make recommendations on pieces of tests that you can reuse that you might have in your library, and a bunch of other things that if we know your application and if you know what your intention is, we can better support you writing your tests by predicting what you're trying to do along the way. Essentially, it's us becoming more aware of what you're trying to do and then increasing your productivity or individual productivity by offering suggestions that you can just accept or reject, but accelerates the way you work. And finally, what we call augmented step generation. We are developing this ability that simply by looking at a portion of your page, we are able to automatically generate and recommend a set of test steps for you. Imagine you simply point to a form and you get a set of generated steps that Virtuoso believes are the right way to test that form. It includes test data, dynamic data, so that that dynamic test is there from the outset. And then you decide if you accept those recommendations or if you want to fine-tune those steps before adding them to your test. This is work in progress, but we are getting more and more excited about it. And I honestly think it will feel a bit like magic. Now, about being powerful. How are we becoming more powerful every day? There are literally hundreds of different elements to this, but let me just highlight 2 or 3. Starting with something that operates almost invisibly in our platform, but is crucial for our customers: smart element identification and intelligent healing. In a nutshell, we interpret each step you write in your test, and because we are able to understand your application, we identify the element you want to interact with each time the test runs. We use multiple techniques for that, but the final result is simply that you don't need to care about selectors. We take care of that for you. And if any of these changes, if your page structure changes, we fix the test for you. This is hours and hours and hours of work saved every week. Also, in the same sense, how can we make the platform more powerful? We do everything we can to reduce maintenance and flakiness. And part of that is making sure you don't repeat yourself. And we are truly becoming obsessed about it and trying to make everything in Virtuoso reusable across the whole platform. Prime example, we recently launched something we call library checkpoints, which our customers are already using to build extensive libraries of essentially test components, parts of tests, so that when teams build their tests, they do it faster by just putting together those components instead of writing individual test steps from scratch every time. And we keep putting a lot of emphasis in things like testing with data. I mentioned this before. We want to help people leverage the data they have, generate better data for more dynamic tests. And so we'll keep pushing more around this in the next few months, and also supporting test teams with hundreds of testers, dozens of teams. And there's a lot around test operations that we already offer, and we want to offer much more, because we do believe that if we really want teams to scale their test initiatives, we need to support them properly from that perspective as well. And finally, last but not the least, we believe that the most successful testing products will be the more intelligent ones. So on this side, we are researching a number of techniques, trying to combine the power of computer intelligence with the irreplaceable instinct of testers, which we believe is really the future. We are pushing hard on this idea of test code generation, where we essentially leverage multiple sources of data about your application to generate actual tests, suggest them so that you can then design, fine-tune, adjust, but most of the legwork is done for you by the tool. And this is what we believe is true co-creation between testers and Virtuoso. Also, conversational authoring. It's essentially we are prototyping on how can we make writing a test even more intuitive. You can write a paragraph describing what you want with a complex intention, and an AI-enabled assistant generate the steps or adjust new ones. Imagine chatting with the tool for the tool to create the test steps for you while looking at the application. And furthermore, we are doing things around optimizing test sets to reduce coverage overlaps or identify duplicated steps so that we can consolidate into components or optimize execution to get results faster. Also on realistic data generation, lots of things to come there. We just believe it's getting high quality, realistic, fine-tuned test data is really hard. So we are exploring a lot there. So hopefully this gives you an idea of the areas we are exploring to take to make this vision for the future of successful testing tools a reality. And with that, I'll hand over to James to show you where you are.
No, that's awesome, Bruno. And you know what I really like about this is that, you know, we obviously speak a lot to the market, and the things we're showing here, while a lot of it is the future for us, we are building it or envisaging it. I mean, this for us represents, you know, what people are telling us. So I think that's super exciting. And, you know, what I intend to do now is sort of provide a bit of a flavor of how the platform today, you know, provides the base to be able to say those things are achievable and why we've taken the approach we have technologically. So there's sort of a bit of a different demo. I'm not going to sort of go through and tell the sort of full story, and but it's more to say what are the technologies today that we have that underpin that approach, and you know, just some of the ways then we will bring in some of that vision for the future that Bruno has highlighted. So just sharing my screen here. So this is a Virtuoso that we're looking at, where, you know, we are, I mean, for us, we're a SaaS application, we're in the browser. Our main scope at the moment is for functional UI testing of browser-based applications, but also we're starting to bring in areas around non-functional testing as well. Things like, you know, performance or looking at things in the network, for example. So number one, I mean, the first thing to understand about Virtuoso is kind of the underlying technology that we have to facilitate creating tests. There are obviously different types, you know, there's recorders, model-based testing, code-based frameworks. We are a natural language platform, which means we have defined syntax like writing or clicking or, you know, different ways to perform actions. But then for us, this combines with something Bruno introduced, the way that we identify elements on a screen. And the nice thing is it's literally, for instance, if I see there's a login button, I can just say, click on, look at the screen and write login, in fact, as it's written on the screen, without having to predefine that. We've got this intelligent object discovery, which means that you can purely write in natural language within seconds of firing up the platform for any browser-based application. So when we sort of talk about the enhancements around authoring, you know, ways that we can enhance the natural language, but when, for instance, we talk about the conversational style, you know, we're already underpinning that because we've taken this natural language approach, which is already intuitive, but then it also lends itself to being, you know, because natural language is in a sense a programmatic language, extending that out to become more powerful. So as of today, I mean, the great thing, of course, you can write tests in natural language, for instance, here against Salesforce, to be able to perform common actions, which are very readable and give us the ability to go through flows. For instance, here we're creating an account, create an opportunity using natural language. Something that Bruno touched on is considering data. So again, we have an approach where, as any good test should really be built in automation, decouple the test from data. So we already have the ability to create variables instead of putting data into the tests. We have sources today such as test data, about some other methods, the sort of underlying framework but then the way is to start saying, I mean, for instance, today, if I want to use test data, then I might create a CSV file and upload that. But actually, you start looking and saying, typically fields, they have labels like first name, last name. So I've already seen some concepts where we can start saying, well, if we can understand the context of a field, why don't we generate some data to go with that alongside some test steps? So this kind of assistive means to start actually generating realistic, but maybe randomized data, or even picking from available system values. The data is typically there, or the context is there to do so. But then if we come on and we sort of think about, reusability is a good one. So for example, I mean, if I take Salesforce today, and to give you an experience of two things here, one is our live authoring. And what that means with our live authoring is that you get, when you start building your test, you have a live browser window. So for instance, here I've got my Salesforce. I've already navigated. And when I start building, I might say, I'm going to put this as logging into Salesforce as my checkpoint, my segment of steps. Live authoring means that I can immediately come in and I can say, right, my username, and I'm going to look at the screen and say it says username there. So let's go and write that. Fantastic. I could then say, write my password, reveal my super secret password here. And as I'm writing these, what's happening is I'm writing it and we're running it immediately. And I can see that we're putting the data into the browser on the screen. We can see it's going green. If I came in and said, I want to then click on the login button, but spell that horrendously, we try to run this. We're actually looking at the DOM of the application using bots. It fails. There's no such element. So then I can just fix that. And what it means, instead of having to come in and say, I build my test and then I can go and then I run it and then find out that it's broken, I can fix it in real time, as we see there, and make sure that I'm almost exploring the application and building valid automation as I go. The intelligent element discovery means that under the hood, as I build those steps, we are capturing things like selectors. And you know what, as Bruno said, in a sense, you don't really need to care about those. They're captured in the background, and we'll talk about in a second what that's powering through our self-healing. But it's almost what you really care about is more this side of things, the test and what's happening on the screen. But then if we think about reusability, so Bruno mentioned about our library checkpoints. So these are logging in steps. They're common steps, other people can use those. So if I had used variables here, like username, password, instead of the data, I've created generic steps that I could then say, why don't I add those into a library so that anybody else can use those? So when I come into my next test and go, let's log in, instead of having to build those steps again, I can just look in the library and say, right, here's my logging in. Okay, there's my steps that I've just built. And I drop that sequence of steps in. So that reusability, in addition to the decoupling from the data, means that you can really start building tests quite quickly. But then where we're also going is last year we introduced our sort of the second version of our API manager. So here, where that comes really into play is we're building tests in the UI here. But of course, we all know that a lot of testing tends to be actually setting up data, or a lot of considerations to testing is setting up data in environments. And there's a tendency sometimes to perform automated steps in the UI to create data. For instance, if we look over here in Salesforce, we're coming in and we're creating an account, creating then an opportunity all in the UI. But the test doesn't actually ask me to do that. I've just got to change the status of an opportunity. I'm creating that data because I don't know what's in the environment. But that's an awful lot of steps to be performing just to test changing a status. So what we're now doing is saying, with the enhancements we've made to our API capabilities, where you can set up APIs. For instance, here I've got Salesforce with a token call, create opportunity call, where I'm mapping in data from test data and environments. That's my setup. But then if I come back into the test, I could actually do the same thing, create an encounter opportunity by, in my test, making a token call, store the token, pass that through to create an account via the API, create an opportunity with the same so that now I've got a very, very limited number of test steps. And those are actually just related to the actual objective of the test. And we're going to be doing a lot more around APIs. Well, we envisage we will, whether it's sort of contract testing or starting to do validations within APIs, more headless API testing. That really is where we sort of see the power, because under the hood, we're collecting a lot of information as we run the tests. For example, if I come into our, not just the test results, but we're also capturing things like network and console logs. So for example, here is a test that was run. We've obviously got the test steps, and we're gathering screenshots for those, the fundamentals of testing and test reporting. But then in addition, we're also capturing things like the network events. So we have requests, we have console logs. So I can start actually drilling in and getting insights into what's happening beyond just the UI. And this is important, for instance, for things like non-functional testing. So where I want to start looking maybe at performance. Is a step taking a particularly long amount of time? And if it is it because of something that's occurring maybe, at the network or the console, which means I can start to debug that. And we intend to start using that information a whole lot more for different purposes. But then it does include as well the fact that as we come in, for instance, if I'm an engineer, then I could actually say, as I am running these tests or as I'm looking at the test outputs, we also give access to the dev tools within Virtuoso. So as an engineer, or if I want to be able to just look a bit more behind the scenes, I can run my test, put in pause points, and then whether I'm an engineer debugging, I could come in and actually see things like the network, the console, so that I could start saying, actually, are the tests failing not because of the functional steps, but because of something happening behind the scenes? So we sort of see this means we're really going to be expanding testing to, really focus on, the usability. All of this is happening in a nice interface. The fact that we're going to expand on the authoring to make it ever easier, whether it's reusability or that assistance, to cater for those simple cases, maybe just test purely in the UI, or whether it's combining UI and API, whether it's headless API testing or starting to actually do those validations more at the sort of the network and the console level or even further, and then making sure we get great reusability so that we're really powering people to focus on what they should be doing with all of this. Because I would kind of argue there's the technological view of the future of testing, which is, as Bruno introduced from our perspective, but the real future of testing is this vision that people will finally be able to perform testing as it should be, rather than chasing their tail, just trying to keep testing running. On which final point, I will just note that one of our most powerful features, and one which, save the best till last, on that keeping tests running and maintenance aspect, as of today, we're using machine learning already to underpin our self-healing. And self-healing basically says every time the tests are running, we are looking on each version of the run to see if there are changes between the previous working model of each step, each element, and if there are changes we're using machine learning algorithms to automatically heal those to dramatically reduce maintenance time. It's what our customers are seeing, massive reduction in the time it takes to maintain tests, one of the key values. And we will only be expanding that further to make sure that as we scale out the testing that can be performed with Virtuoso, so that assistive or AI or machine learning driven capabilities only facilitate that further. So I hope between Bruno and myself, we have tickled at least at the fringes of the future at testing to provide some insights on both where we see this going, but also how we envisage that can truly occur. We're at 1:30, but we do have time just, I think, to take a few questions. So on that front, I do see a question here. One for you probably, Bruno, is everyone's talking about ChatGPT. Do you see that being a thing that is going to really be used, or is it just a bit of a fad?
No, I don't think it's a fad. I think the concept, not ChatGPT itself, but the concept and what ChatGPT is showing us, that it's already possible with existing technology. I think that will be a key part of not only Virtuoso for sure, but also the future of testing tools. That conversational style, the ability to really understand knowledge, and understand, for example, past tests, and we have millions of tests, to then be able to come up with new tests, that type of thing is very similar to the pattern that ChatGPT delivers. And so I do think it will be a huge part of the future.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, look, Bruno, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for attending. This will be available on playback. If anybody is interested to find out more, please visit us at virtuoso.qa. Otherwise, it's simply to say thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, James.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.